This is week 196 of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. I'm Belokur, reporting to you from Kyiv, and I'll be taking you through the top stories from Ukraine this week. On Friday night, Andriy Yermak, head of President Volodymyr Zelensky's office, submitted his resignation after the National Anti-Corruption Bureau searched his apartment earlier that day. Yermak is being investigated by NABU in connection with the wide-scale corruption case sweeping the highest echelons of Ukraine's government. Although he hasn't been charged with anything, calls for him to step down were growing steeply in the days leading up to his resignation, from both Ukrainians and allies.
Hi, I am Katerina Denisova, a Kyiv independent reporter with the National Desk. It's no exaggeration to say that Andriy Yermak's dismissal is the biggest political shakeup of at least the past 4 years during the full-scale war. Since 2020, he had led the president's office and gathered unprecedented influence within the Ukrainian government. A lot of what he was doing was actually beyond his formal powers. For President Volodymyr Zelensky, who bolstered this and downplayed his influence at the same time, I think this created a kind of illusion that if he would get rid of Yermak, the system would collapse. Some argue that Yermak absorbed the political backlash, shielding Zelensky, who will now face the responsibility alone. But I think that this move and Yermak's dismissal gives Zelensky an opportunity to reboot the system and to build something new, even though this decision came too late, and that at the very least this should have happened last week when, despite the scandal and criticism, Yermak was still appointed to lead a Ukrainian delegation during the peace talks with the U.S. Now we will watch a couple of things. First is that whether other controversial officials in the president's office who were close to Yermak, such as Oleg Tatarov, will be dismissed or remain in their position, and whether Yermak himself will remain in the president's office but unofficially, and whether he can become like a shadow power broker in the president's office. I don't exclude this option. And secondly, we will watch what steps the anti-corruption institutions will take next regarding Yermak and other Ukrainian officials. For example, top security official and former defense minister Rustem Umerov, who is also implicated in this corruption scandal, still remains in his position. Now he has been appointed to lead the Ukrainian delegation instead of Yermak. Umerov has not been charged or searched, but he has been questioned by the National Anti-Corruption Bureau this week. So he may become Zelensky's next big test if any charges will be brought against him in the near future.
Where we left off, the U.S. has once again brought forward a proposal for ending the war, which, in the style of previous failed iterations, favors Russia's maximalist demands and requires concessions from Ukraine that all but ensure reinvasion by Russia in the coming years. Or, in other words, capitulation, in a mandate handed down rather than negotiated with Ukraine at the table. Ukraine has been understandably unwilling and constitutionally unable to consent to its own demise, even as critics use this as an opportunity to blame the war's continuation on Ukraine, rather than the country that invaded and continues capturing land. The latest twist came this week with the leak of phone conversations between American Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and a high-ranking Russian official, communication which left little doubt that the 28-point proposal is authored to Russia's specifications. In the leaked conversations, Witkoff, a real estate developer turned diplomat in the second Trump administration, is heard coaching Vladimir Putin's aide, Yuri Ushakov, on how to sell a Russia-centric proposal to the White House, reassuring him that the American president will give him a lot of space to cut a deal to Russia's liking. For Ukrainians, the idea that an American envoy is essentially workshopping talking points with an invading totalitarian state merely confirms what many already suspected. Witkoff has been operating less as a neutral broker in the peace process and more as the Kremlin's liaison to the American presidency. And Trump's reaction to the leak did little to diffuse that implication. When asked about it, he shrugged and said that it was standard operating procedure and that Witkoff had to sell Ukraine to Russia. You know, because democracy can be bought and sold like a half-finished property in Atlantic City. European reactions to the plan, and the secretive way that it was authored by American and Kremlin officials, have also been negative. One Czech expert told the Kyiv Independent that the plan evoked Munich in 1938, with European security being traded away over the heads of those most affected. Analysts warned that forcing Ukraine to cede territory and accept permanent second-class status on the liminal border of NATO would shred the core principles of Europe's post-Cold War order. Borders can't be changed by force, and sovereign states choose their own alliances. In the wake of the plan's announcement, Ukrainian and European officials met with American representatives in Geneva to adjust the plan, with President Volodymyr Zelensky saying on Monday that the original 28 points had been cut down and that new elements had been added to the framework. Any agreement that ratifies Russian control over additional Ukrainian land or permanently downgrades Ukraine's security status will be almost impossible for Zelensky to sell domestically after hundreds of thousands of casualties. We gave Ukrainians on the streets of Kyiv the opportunity to tell you themselves, so I'll hand it over to them for a sec.
All those 28 points that they decided to show us this time, it's nothing new. It already happened. And if we were to accept those terms, we would just postpone the war and it would be the same as it was in 2014.
Maybe the second plan that they've been working on is better for Ukraine. Of course, if Russia will sign it, but you have to compromise. And in any way, for me, the most important thing is people who are alive and will be alive.
Війну треба зупинити зараз, але відстоюючи інтереси України в тих масштабах, які можливо зараз.
Судячи з реакції Росії, ці 28 або 26, потім або 19 пунктів для них є неприйнятними. Можливо, деякі пункти з цих 19 будуть складати основу подальшого мирного договору, але не уявляється, що він буде підписаний найближчим часом, незважаючи на бажання Дональда Трампа.
Я не знаю, чи взагалі Росія і Україна найближчим часом кладуть якусь угоду. Мені здається, це більше спроба виставити Україну, що вона знову не хоче погоджуватись на якийсь мирний план і продовжувати дурити Трампа. Я дуже хочу закінчення війни, але прям не за будь-яку ціну.
Russia can attack Ukraine in some years again and try their luck again. But I think Europe and maybe America has to be more think about how to prevent that, because it's a big possibility that it will happen.
Для мене всі пункти важливі. Я не можу виділити. Для мене і Донбас, і Крим, і військо, і НАТО, і Євросоюз. Для мене неможливо виділити якесь собі.
And with their economics and everything that is going on, at some point they will not be able to continue this war. But as of right now, it's just a matter of who is going to last longer. And they are unfortunately bigger than us, and we'll see. But I hope for the best still.
Regardless of how much each side says that they're willing to compromise on the nuances, the fact remains that each side's key demands remain completely irreconcilable. Russia's foreign minister Sergei Lavrov warned Moscow would reject any revised plan that failed to meet its longtime demands, meaning that any way Ukraine can tailor the plan to its own needs lessens the likelihood that Russia will continue to engage with it. Russian President Vladimir Putin went even further, demanding that Ukraine withdraw from the territories it controls, presumably referring to the remainder of Ukrainian-controlled Donetsk Oblast, as a condition for hostilities to stop. We've been through this multiple times this year. Simply saying we need to end this war does nothing to address the reality of what that could look like. Trump has, again, backed himself into a corner with this flimsy approach. On the one hand, he's drowning in allegations and rumors about the Epstein files and really needs a domestic PR win right now. And saying that he ended the largest war in Europe in nearly a century would certainly be a win. But likewise, his polling numbers after upheavals like the February Oval Office fight with Zelensky or Putin's August Alaska visit show that the majority of Americans don't support outright abandoning or disparaging Ukraine, and a bad deal that blatantly sells out Ukraine could further tar an already flailing public image and legacy. Whether because of the domestic backlash or not, on Tuesday, Trump walked back earlier comments that implied that this past Thursday was the deadline for Ukraine to actually agree to the plan, insisting that in reality, there is no set deadline, and describing the original 28 points as just a map, not a fixed plan. Trump instructed Witkoff to dispatch to Moscow to see Putin, while Army Secretary Dan Driscoll is expected to visit Ukraine again, and according to Trump, there are only a few remaining points of disagreement before a deal could be finalized. So, bottom line, there is no bottom line. We've been here before, and we'll probably be here again. Even the best possible revision of this plan remains lopsided. It still focuses on permanently constraining Ukraine, while demanding very little of Russia beyond a temporary pause in fighting and vague promises of non-aggression. At most, this approach will give Russia time to recoup before its next invasion, which it can easily justify with any number of convoluted tactics from the Kremlin handbook. As someone who has to track the week-to-week life and death of every victory plan and ceasefire strategy and peace proposal, I'm deeply pessimistic that we'll even remember this particular iteration in the grand scheme of things. What Ukrainians won't forget, however, is the crippling exhaustion that comes from living under attack for years on end, and the betrayal that comes from so-called allies who just can't pick a side. The Kyiv Independent celebrated a milestone on November 11th. It's been exactly 4 years since our founding. So to mark this occasion, we launched a birthday campaign with the goal of getting to 25,000 members before the end of 2025. And we are closing in on the final few hundred people, and you could be the one to take us over the line. And yes, it makes me happy when my show is one of the top referrers. So if you'd like to help us celebrate our birthday and prepare for many more to come, there'll be a link to our membership page in the description below. Thanks also to everyone who donates directly via YouTube. We see you, and we appreciate you. It's been a while since we had one of these, so American actress Reese Witherspoon, whose book club stamped books are often among the only English-language books on display at European bookstores, has finally written a debut novel of her own. And it takes place in the wealthiest neighborhood of Moscow in present day. One of Ukraine's largest publishing houses, Vivat, has dropped the book after a spokesperson said that they had acquired translation rights in 2024, not knowing what it would be about. Okay, disclaimers abound. I haven't read the book, which was ghostwritten by a popular mystery author, and it's not known how the pair came up with the story or executed it. To my knowledge, Reese Witherspoon has never been to Russia and has no strong connection to it. From descriptions, the Russian characters in the book seem to function as tropes. The plot centers around oligarchs, plastic surgery, and shady underworlds, and the Russian setting was likely invented as a way to marry those themes in a way that was plausible to American audiences, while still being remote and exotic enough that not all details had to be accurate. This is also what I think happened with the Oscar-winning movie Anora. The character's actual Russianness, as such, was secondary to the ways in which American perceptions of Russia allow for billionaire characters, car chase scenes, and a shadow world of crime and corruption that can move the plot forward as needed. So, all the questions that we asked when Anora came out. Are politics and art ever separate? Is it a crime to simply exist as a Russian in fiction when Russia is carrying out a real-world invasion? So having not read it, I don't get the impression Reese Witherspoon penned a love letter to authoritarian Russia. Rather, she seems to have used Russia as a narrative tool, which in turn will continue to perpetuate to Americans a version of Russia that retains a degree of glamour and intrigue. She sets the story in Rublyovka, the Park Avenue of Moscow, and her characters are oligarchs. She seems to be giving Russia the bad boy treatment, rather than the totalitarian treatment it deserves. I spent a long time trying to come up with a good simile here, and the best I can compare it to is an American author in the 1940s writing a mystery novel set in upscale Berlin that doesn't acknowledge Nazism or the war. Is that illegal? No. Is that odd and tasteless? Yes. I'm also reminded of when Elizabeth Gilbert, the author of Eat, Pray, Love, scrapped a 2023 novel that was set in Soviet-era Siberia, claiming that she didn't want to do harm to Ukrainians by publishing it. And it wasn't totally clear what she intended in that messaging. Her book wasn't set in modern day, and its premise didn't seem inherently pro-Russian, so there was question of whether she was simply taking the safe route in dodging controversy. And in both cases, with Gilbert canceling the publication of her book amid the criticism and Witherspoon moving ahead with hers, there's the same question. What would you have these authors do? Should we erase all mention of Russia from art until justice has been served? The best answer that I can come up with is that when people are suffering greatly on a daily basis at the hands of an aggressor, one can't expect them to be amused by seeing that aggressor clumsily translated into fiction by a foreigner with no stake on either side. It's anyone's right in a democratic society to write whatever fiction they want. But it's also Ukraine's right to reject it, to find it offensive, and to question what appears to be low-effort trope farming. Reese Witherspoon doesn't seem to have dug too deep to understand the culture she was using in her storytelling. Rather, she used the stereotype of 21st century Russia, the wealth, the beauty, the secrecy, while ignoring the other reality of modern Russia, the poverty, the corruption, and the enthusiastic waging of war. I'm not calling on her to cancel her book's publication. The issue is not whether to censor or not censor a novel. The question is why authors feel compelled to present a fictional version of Russia that can't hold space for its reality, and why readers tolerate it. When we look at the, in this case, American stereotype of what Russia and Russians are, it's alarming to think that the events of the last 4 years haven't done enough to shift that image closer to what Ukrainians know it to be. Russia to Ukrainians isn't oligarchs and Aston Martins. It's the sound of kamikaze drones hitting residential buildings at 2 a.m. And at a time when it's increasingly necessary and increasingly difficult to tell the world the truth about Russia's crimes, extra noise that softens that image, however tangentially, is indeed harmful to the cause. For our North American supporters, I have a quick reminder. The Kyiv Independent will be holding its first ever live event in New York City, where members of our team will share stories from the life of a newsroom in times of war. The program will include personal accounts by our staff, visual storytelling, and a silent auction whose proceeds will go towards supporting the work of our War Crimes Investigations Unit. You can learn more and reserve a spot at the link in the description below.
Hey, my name is Tim Zadoroshny. I'm a reporter with the Kyiv Independent, and today we received a question from our member Chris. He asks, given that the peace agreement seems to be drafted and changed in secret, it feels like multiple parties trying to dupe Ukrainians. What can be done by Ukrainians and Europeans if such a deal would be wildly unfavorable? He also mentions that he lost his trust in the Ukrainian government after so many American deals have been agreed to. So what I think is important to understand that Ukraine right now is a wartime democracy, and what we've seen happening a lot of times when Ukrainians don't like what our government is doing, we just go outside and protest those decisions. And we also have seen this happening during the war, because in July, when Ukrainian government was trying to dismantle anti-corruption institutions, Ukrainians just went outside, they protested this decision. We've seen a huge backlash from Ukrainian civil society against those decisions. And what happened? Ukrainian government actually stepped back and they restored the independence of those institutions. So I believe if Ukrainians would see that the government is agreeing to a peace framework that would basically mean a capitulation, we would see a huge backlash from Ukrainian citizens, and I believe the civil societies, they might protest those decisions, and the governments might eventually step back. What's also important here is that, for example, if we talk about territories, because under those peace proposals, the 28 peace plan, as they call it, under those proposals, Ukrainian military would be asked to withdraw from some of the unoccupied parts of Ukraine, for example, from key cities in Donetsk Oblast that is located in eastern Ukraine. And I was actually talking to some of Ukrainian officials, and what they told me, they doubt that Ukrainian military would comply with this kind of orders. So they are saying they don't believe Ukrainian military would actually withdraw from the unoccupied parts of Ukraine. It's actually something to keep in mind, that Ukrainian military are just simple Ukrainians, simple people. Regarding European angle of this question, what we know so far is that European capitals, they were not involved in crafting those peace proposals, the initial ones, but after that, they released those counter proposals that were basically rejected by Moscow just days after they released it. I think Europe still has some of the points they could apply pressure at. For example, they still import huge amounts of Russian energy resources. Of course, they have this plan to phase out Russian energy imports. They are planning to phase out LNG imports till 2027, and all the Russian energy imports till 2028. But still, let's keep in mind that those money, they are basically redirected to supporting Russian war machine. And what Europe should do, they should basically accelerate those phasing out of Russian energy resources. From the economical point of view, they still have those Russian frozen assets. When the war just started, they froze some $300 billion in sovereign Russian assets, and so far Europe has been reluctant to seize them. But what I believe here is that those money could actually help Ukraine to win this war, because since 2022, Kyiv has been asking Europe to redirect those money to support Ukrainian defense sector, to support Ukrainian economy, and so far Europe has been rejecting those proposals. There was a lot of talks about it, but we see no decisions. Of course, it's important that Europe they crafted this peace proposal from their side. They also continue to support Ukraine from diplomatic point. They've been releasing a lot of statements, and they say we support Ukrainian territorial integrity, but still it's not enough. You gotta move from talking to actual actions.
That's all for this week. We'll be back next Sunday with more news from Ukraine. If you appreciated this video, please consider becoming a member of the Kyiv Independent community. It's thanks to viewers like you that we can do this work, and we're so grateful for your support. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.